The ancient Egyptians are often depicted as a civilization obsessed with death, yet simultaneously enamored with the promise of an eternal afterlife. Their monumental tombs, intricate funerary rituals, and the very fabric of their belief system seem to whisper of a serene continuation beyond the veil. But beneath this veneer of hopeful anticipation, a deeper, more primal emotion pulsed through the hearts of every Egyptian, from pharaoh to commoner. It was not merely respect for the unknown, but an intrinsic, pervasive fear. A fear of what lay beyond the threshold, a terror rooted in uncertainty and the very real possibility of oblivion. The vision presented to the living was one of unparalleled bliss, the field of reeds, an idyllic mirror of Egypt itself, where one could farm, feast, and reunite with loved ones for eternity. A beautiful thought, isn't it? But this celestial agricultural paradise was not a guaranteed destination. It was a privilege, painstakingly earned and fiercely protected. The journey there was fraught with unseen perils, an odyssey through treacherous realms that could shatter the soul and consign it to a fate far worse than mere non-existence. This disparity, between the promised ideal and the stark, perilous reality, formed the bedrock of their profound anxiety. To reach the field of reeds, the deceased soul, or Ba, had to navigate the Duat, the underworld. This was no tranquil passage, but a labyrinthine realm teeming with fearsome deities, monstrous guardians, and fiery lakes. Imagine traversing a landscape where every shadow concealed a potential threat, where hidden traps could ensnare the unwary, and where ancient powers lay dormant, waiting to test the resolve of the newly departed. This was the soul's crucible, a trial by fire, water, and shadow. Every step was a gamble, every turn a risk, making the prospect of the afterlife less a peaceful slumber and more a desperate struggle for survival. At the culmination of this terrifying journey stood the Hall of Two Truths, where the ultimate judgment awaited. Here, the heart of the deceased, believed to be the seat of intellect and morality, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. This wasn't merely a symbolic gesture. It was a true assessment of a lifetime's deeds, thoughts, and intentions. The outcome was absolute, with no room for appeal. This single, pivotal moment determined eternal salvation or utter annihilation. The sheer finality of it must have cast a long, cold shadow over every decision made during life. What happened if the heart proved heavy, tainted by sin and imbalance? The consequence was swift, brutal, and utterly terrifying. Standing ever ready by the scales was Ammit, a monstrous entity with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Ammit was the devourer of the dead, destined to consume the hearts of the unworthy. This was not merely death, but a second, irreversible death, the complete obliteration of the soul, erasing its very existence from the fabric of reality. Imagine the existential dread of facing such an end, to be utterly erased. To even stand a chance at the afterlife, the body had to be preserved. Mummification was not a choice, but an absolute necessity. The Ka, one of the soul's components, needed a physical vessel to return to, a recognizable home. Without an intact body, the Ka would wander aimlessly, never able to partake in the afterlife. The process itself was arduous, invasive, and incredibly precise, spanning over 70 days. Any error, any imperfection, could jeopardize the soul's eternal fate. The pressure on the embalmers, the family, and even the deceased themselves, must have been immense. The journey through the Duat and the judgment before Osiris were not trials faced unarmed. The deceased required an arsenal of protective spells, prayers, and secret knowledge. This was enshrined within texts like the Book of the Dead, a collection of over 200 spells intended to guide and safeguard the soul. But these texts were not mere suggestions, they were vital instructions, intricate and nuanced. Mispronounce a word, forget a specific ritual, and the protection vanished, leaving the soul vulnerable. This incredible reliance on perfect execution added another layer of anxiety. The greatest fear, overriding even the terror of the Duat's monsters, was the concept of complete non-existence. To be devoured by Ammit, or simply to fail the trials and fade into nothingness, was the ultimate punishment. It wasn't merely the cessation of life, but the eradication of memory, identity, and any potential for continued being. This state of perpetual oblivion was a more potent deterrent than any fire or monster. The Egyptians held strong beliefs in the power of one's name and memory. To lose both, irrevocably, was the most profound horror imaginable, a true end to all. Beyond the physical body, the preservation of one's name was paramount. To have one's name spoken was to ensure a continued existence in the collective memory, a vital aspect of their understanding of immortality. To lose one's name, whether through the destruction of monuments or the failure of descendants to perform rites, was akin to a second death. This meant even after navigating the duat and passing judgment, the threat lingered. The anxiety of being forgotten, of fading from human consciousness, added a profound social and cultural dimension to their afterlife fears, tying personal salvation to public remembrance. Even for those fortunate enough to reach the field of reeds, there was a catch. The afterlife was a mirror of earthly life, including its labors. Egyptians believed they would still be required to farm and perform duties. To circumvent this, they introduced ushabtis, small servant figurines enchanted to come to life and perform tasks on behalf of the deceased. But what if the magic failed? What if the supply of ushabtis was insufficient? The potential for eternal toil, even in paradise, must have been a subtle, nagging fear, a fear of never truly finding rest, even in the eternal life. The elaborate funerary preparations, mummification, sarcophagi, extensive Book of the Dead papyri, and numerous ushabtis, were incredibly expensive. This created a stark socioeconomic divide in the prospects of the afterlife. Only the wealthiest could afford the full suite of protections. While commoners had their own, simpler rites, the elaborate system implied a clear advantage for the elite. This disparity, where eternal salvation seemed linked to earthly wealth, must have bred significant fear and resentment among the less privileged. Did their lesser preparations doom them to a less certain, perhaps more perilous, journey? The Egyptian concept of the soul was not a single, unified entity, but a complex constellation of components, the Ka, the Ba, the Ak, the Ren, and the Shut. Each had its own purpose and required specific care and preservation. The Ka needed the physical body, the Ba journeyed forth, and the Ak represented the transfigured spirit. The challenge was ensuring all these disparate parts remained intact and could reunite or function correctly. The fear wasn't just of total annihilation, but of a fragmented, incomplete existence, a profound disturbance to the very essence of being. Despite the detailed guides of the Book of the Dead, the duat remained a realm shrouded in ultimate mystery. The spells were there to counter specific threats, implying a vast array of unseen, uncatalogued dangers that could emerge. This constant threat of the unforeseen, the unknown horror lurking just beyond the edge of their sacred texts, must have been profoundly unsettling. It wasn't just about passing tests they knew about, but surviving encounters with entities or challenges for which no spell existed, a terrifying void of uncertainty that even their elaborate preparation couldn't entirely fill. The fate of the deceased rested in the hands of numerous deities. Osiris, Anubis, Thoth, and many others played pivotal roles. While these gods represented order and justice, they were also formidable, often mysterious entities. Their will, their judgment, while bound by cosmic law, could still feel arbitrary or simply beyond mortal comprehension. The fear of inadvertently displeasing a deity, or falling victim to a divine caprice, must have been ever present. This was not a system based on simple faith, but on appeasement and adherence to a divine bureaucracy whose inner workings remained eternally opaque. The sun god Ra underwent a nightly journey through the underworld, battling chaos and emerging reborn each morning. This cosmic cycle offered a powerful metaphor for rebirth. Yet, for mortals, the cycle was not guaranteed. To emulate Ra's triumphant return required immense magical protection and moral purity. The prospect of failing to achieve this spiritual rebirth, of being left behind in the darkness while the sun rose anew, was a poignant and terrifying thought. Their afterlife wasn't just a destination, but a continuous, active struggle to align with the divine rhythm of creation itself. The ancient Egyptians envisioned not one, but two forms of death. The first was the physical cessation of life, the departure from the mortal realm. The second, far more dreaded, was the complete annihilation of the soul, to be forgotten, unremembered, and devoured. This existential threat of a second death was a profound motivator for all their elaborate preparations. It wasn't enough to die well, one had to stay dead, but only in the good sense, avoiding the ultimate erasure. This stark contrast between passing into the afterlife and truly ceasing to exist shaped their entire worldview. The sheer investment, both in resources and psychological effort, dedicated to securing a favorable afterlife speaks volumes about the depth of this fear. Families spent generations' worth of wealth on tombs, coffins, mummification, and funerary goods. Priests dedicated their lives to mastering complex rituals. This wasn't merely cultural tradition, it was an existential insurance policy against the terrifying unknown. The enormous societal output directed towards death underscores how profoundly the fear of a bad afterlife permeated every aspect of their civilization, driving innovation and devotion. Despite all the preparations, the spells, the rituals, and the fervent hope, true certainty about the afterlife remained elusive. No one returned to confirm the efficacy of their efforts. This fundamental uncertainty, the nagging doubt in the back of every mind, must have been a constant source of anxiety. What if a crucial spell was flawed? What if the judgment was arbitrary? What if, despite everything, the do-it proved too vast, too treacherous, or the gods too indifferent? The lack of empirical feedback left a lingering void, filled only by faith and, crucially, by persistent, underlying fear. So, the image of ancient Egypt, often romanticized as a beacon of eternal hope, held a profound shadow. Their elaborate death cults, far from being expressions of simple optimism, were potent responses to a very real, deep-seated fear. The fear of a perilous journey, the terror of judgment, the threat of obliteration, the burden of eternal labor, and the ever-present uncertainty of the unknown, these were the driving forces behind their magnificent funerary culture. They built monuments not just to life, but as desperate bulwarks against the abyss, seeking to control an uncontrollable destiny.